it on?
Yeah. Don't move.
Well, I'm so excited to be here with you today. My name is Dan Helmer, and 3 times a year, my wife Karen, a public school teacher, has to huddle in the corner of her classroom with her children to prepare for the day that there's a shooter. That shouldn't be happening in our country. I'm a West Point graduate, a Rhodes Scholar, a combat veteran who was awarded the Bronze Star. I've seen firsthand the consequences of Washington cowardice overseas. Now we're seeing them here at home. The weapons of war I carried in Iraq and Afghanistan shouldn't be in our schools or on our streets. And it's time for a representative, and I'm tired of representatives like Barbara Comstock, who defend the NRA instead of defending our children. I'm ready to go to Washington and fight for our progressive values. I've been fighting for us all my life, and I hope you'll join me. My name is Dan Helmer. Thank you.
Gun violence is an everyday occurrence in our country right now, and we saw that again today at the Waffle House in Nashville. It doesn't need to be that way. And it is that way because we have representatives in Congress who take money from the NRA and vote against common sense gun safety. We have hold the wire. Okay, here we go. Be kind to me, Luke. We have Congress people who take money from Big Pharma and then vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act and take money from Big Oil, and it's no surprise then that our top 3 environmental positions are held now by people who deny climate change. My name's Allison Friedman, and both inside and outside of government, I have spent my career standing up to bullies and abuses of power. That's why I'm running against Barbara Comstock. Thank you.
I can see everybody. My name is Lindsay Davis Stover, and I don't have to tell you how important this legislation is. This election is one of the biggest elections of our year. Comstock votes with Trump 97% of the time. She's bought and paid for by the NRA, and she serves corporations over our communities. I'm the only candidate that has the lived experience and the professional experience to really represent this district. It's one thing to talk about the impact of legislation like the tax bill. It's another thing entirely to have lived it. I've had 3 minimum wage jobs at one time. I actually am still paying off over $80,000 worth of student loans. But most importantly, I'm the only candidate in this race that has extensive federal legislative experience as Chief of Staff on Capitol Hill and Senior Advisor in the Obama administration. I've worked to help constituents solve problems and push legislation that has changed lives. I have the experience to go head to head with Barbara Comstock and win, and I look forward to working with you to do just that.
Is this working?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Hi, my name is Paul Pelletier, and I'm running for Congress because I want to help end the era of broken government. As a federal prosecutor, a public servant for over almost three decades, I know what good government looks like. I spent an entire career just fighting for what's right and trying to hold accountable and take on those who did wrong. I fought drug traffickers, I fought white-collar Wall Street criminals, and I fought public corruption bad guys. And I didn't let them win, ever. And I also have taken on the healthcare industry. And I, through creation of healthcare fraud strike forces around America, have actually saved taxpayers over $10 billion in healthcare costs. So, no, I have the experience and courage to take on the NRA. I have the experience and courage to take on those powerful interests who would fight to defeat healthcare for everyone. And finally, I have the courage and experience to hold this president and his administration accountable for what they're doing to this democracy. Thank you.
I'm an infectious disease scientist. I'm running for Congress against Barbara Comstock, not only to unseat her, but to also fight for science. I've spent nearly 20 years of my career combating and finding disease cures for some of the most dangerous and deadly pathogens, including HIV and Ebola. As a scientist, I have acted in a transparent and honest way. I have presented my data honestly and openly with my colleagues, and I have worked together to find solutions for complex problems. In short, I put forth that I have acted as I expect our elected officials to act. Unfortunately, we're not currently governed by scientists, but rather by a professional political class made up of lawyers, lobbyists, and political operatives who are dismissive of data, afraid of transparency, and more interested in saying the right thing than doing the right thing. And I'm running for Congress not because it was my dream to be a politician, but because I am afraid of what this administration and what this professional political class is going to do to our country.
My name is Jennifer Wexton, and I'm going to repeal and replace Barbara Comstock. For the past 4 years, I've been representing Central and Eastern Loudoun and Western Fairfax in the Virginia State Senate. So I went down to the Senate, and ever since I've been there, I've been in the minority. But that hasn't stopped me from getting things done for my constituents. I've passed legislation to keep kids safer in daycares and online. I've passed legislation to help combat the heroin and opioid crisis. I've passed legislation to help stem the school-to-prison pipeline and get more resources to victims of domestic violence. And I've also fought back against the divisive and bad Republican agenda in Richmond, and fought for our progressive values to do things like institute universal background checks, to have investments and improvements in our environment, and to expand Medicaid to the almost 400,000 Virginians who fall in the coverage gap. And this is exactly what I will do in Congress. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The way we're going to do the questions, I will start with the first person at the end of each row, so Mr. Helmer, and then the second question to that group will just go down, so each person will have an opportunity to get the question first and to get the question last. All right, so we'll start with this group. The Affordable Care Act remains the law of the land, but it was always a law that could be improved, as President Obama noted before he left office. One criticism was that the individual mandate, one of the law's key pillars, was too weak. Now, under President Trump, the individual mandate has been repealed. If elected, would you support reinstating the individual mandate and having higher tax penalties?
Thank you. My entire adult life, or almost my entire adult life, my family and I have gotten our health care through the government as a result of my military service. Government provided health care so that if I get sick, or my wife gets sick, or my boys Harris and Aaron get sick, we can go see a doctor and get taken care of. And I believe that in the richest country in the history of the world, every American ought to be able to receive the same health care that I'm entitled to as a veteran. So to answer your question, the ACA was a great start, but it's time to go beyond the ACA. And I support a Medicare for all option, so that if you don't get or can't get health care from your employer or the exchanges, you can opt into Medicare. I know that we can do it. Thank you.
I believe that healthcare is a fundamental right. And in order for people to be able to access that fundamental right, it has to be both affordable and accessible. The ACA was an important, meaningful step, and the individual mandate is absolutely critical for it. Any proposal for healthcare going forward, I've said I would evaluate based on 3 fundamental questions. How does it affect people? How much does it cost? And what's the process for getting there? And I think far too often we treat those needs as if they're mutually exclusive, and they're just not. I would support expanding access and increasing affordability by looking at a Medicare buy-in option that can help lower costs.
I believe that healthcare isn't just a privilege for those who can afford it. I believe it is a right, and it's a right we shouldn't have to keep marching for and fighting for every 2 and 3 months. We unfortunately are in a situation where this tax bill put at risk over 14 million Americans' health care. 14 million Americans now are at risk of losing health care. We have to ensure, unfortunately, that this administration isn't able to overturn health care even further. The 2019 Trump budget makes cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and food stamps, all on the premise that ACA will be overturned. So this fight isn't over. We have to ensure that we're able to take back the House. And we're gonna have to do a lot of blocking and tackling just to keep what we have. But as Democrats, we also have to set the stage and start the national conversation to ensure that every single American has access to affordable and quality health care.
Hey, just to follow up, you talked about Medicare buy-in. Are you talking about Medicare X, such as what Senator Kaine proposed, as opposed to Medicare for all?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, this side here. So one of the criticisms of the Affordable Care Act is that though it offers generous insurance subsidies for those who qualify, the thresholds were set much too low, so many middle-class families did not qualify. So they ended up getting hit with higher insurance premiums. The current threshold is 400% of the federal poverty line, and if you earn $1 above that amount, you lose your entire subsidy. Would you increase the threshold, and if so, to what level?
Thank you, Glenn. Like everyone that has spoken so far, I also agree that healthcare is a right and not a privilege. I believe everyone is entitled to access to affordable healthcare. I spent many, many, many years of my career ensuring that our healthcare trust fund was protected and guarded as if it was my own money. And I did that righteously and religiously. But I also believe, Glenn, in answer to your question, that yes, that if you make a penny over the threshold, then you can't have access to that. So I think the threshold does have to be increased. But I want everybody here to know that when you first talked about it, you said that the mandate had been eliminated. Well, that's because Barbara Comstock voted to eliminate it. And that's one of the reasons why we gotta get rid of her. But number two, that we need to the way to make access to healthcare more affordable is to drive down the cost of fraud. And I did that for my entire career. 10 cents of every dollar you pay in healthcare is stolen by fraud. And we need to stop that now.
So to answer the question directly, I would most definitely vote to increase the threshold. I firmly believe that healthcare is a right and not a privilege, that we should all have access to it. But moreover, one of the pillars of my campaign is that I believe that we should have a single-payer healthcare system, Medicare for all, not a Medicare option, not a halfway mark. I think we need to shoot for the moon, because if we're truly going to have affordable and accessible healthcare, it needs to be available to everyone. And as an infectious disease scientist, I would definitely have a focus on preventative care, so that we're pouring our research dollars into our companies and our universities so that we have those front-end treatments for diseases and disorders, because what we face at the late stage is limited and very expensive. And I would also want to make sure that we have a quality healthcare system and make sure we're having the numbers of doctors and nurses that we need. By 2030, we're going to have a doctor shortage on the order of 100,000 doctors across this country. And so I would want to make sure that as a support to our healthcare system, we have a robust STEM program in schools so that anybody that wants to become a doctor has that opportunity.
This is an issue that really hits home for me, because here in Virginia, Republicans have refused steadfastly to expand Medicaid. And as a result, hundreds of thousands of Virginians fall in the coverage gap where they make too much, they make too little and too much to be subsidized and even qualify for federal subsidies. So one of the things, we don't have to reinvent the wheel in this process. One of the things that the federal government has done in terms of other public benefits programs is that we were facing this situation where there were arbitrary cutoffs, and you would get nothing, like as we see with the subsidies when you reached a certain income level. And that's not in the public interest. We were seeing that also with public benefits. What the government came up with was something called the bond program, where it was a gradual reduction in the benefit that you received as your income went up. So you want to encourage people to be able to work and make more money, but not discourage them from getting to that point where they would no longer qualify for the subsidies. So I think we need to be creative and look at a sliding scale.
So we've had two of the candidates here talk about how they were in favor of Medicare for all. And I want to ask both of you, how would you actually accomplish that? Because the Affordable Care Act only affected about 15% of the people that currently are in the insurance markets, and yet it was considered incredibly disruptive. So if you do Medicare for all, you're essentially taking the entire healthcare system onto a completely new system, which not only would be potentially expensive, but it would be also extremely disruptive, as opposed to other more gradual efforts, such as what I mentioned before, Medicare X, where you kind of give people the option to eventually move into it. So it's easy to say you want single payer, but I'm curious to actually hear how you would actually do this and how you would fund it.
Sure, so I want to be very clear. I support a Medicare for all option, so that if you don't get or can't get your health care through the exchanges or from your employer, you could opt into Medicare at a means-adjusted premium. So I think I had an amazing chance to work with the Department of Veterans Affairs for a year and a half while I was in the private sector. And we looked and provided oversight. I was the project lead of a team that found $1 billion of savings that we could redirect towards our veterans to make sure that they get the care that they've earned. And what do we see? What do we see at the VA that we also see in our government? That currently the government, including in the VA, is not negotiating drug prices. In fact, it's prohibited by doing that from law at the national level. So it's time for us to unleash the government's ability to use its scale to drive down prices so we're not paying 20 times, 200 times, or even 500 times what other countries are paying. It's time to actually, we have a country that's, yeah, exactly. And we have a country and a system right now designed. If you operated your car this way, you would pay to replace the engine, but you want to pay for an oil change. We need to incentivize preventative care, lower the cost of care, and we have a real opportunity to do that by expanding the pool of people who are covered and unshackling federal government. Thank you.
Okay, just to clarify, you are not talking about a single payer system.
I am saying that we have a Medicare for all option. You can opt into Medicare, and eventually that is going to drive competition on the marketplace. It's going to mean that insurers actually have to provide value. It's going to be least disruptive, but it means that every American is entitled to opt into Medicare if they choose.
I see.
Thank you.
Sure. So I am advocating for single-payer Medicare for all as the overall program. And you're right, it will be complex, it will take time, but as they say, nothing good is easy, right? And I think that we've been talking about having that kind of program for decades now in this country. And we've seen it be successful in other countries, in the UK, in Canada, and right now our healthcare program it's a benefit to your employment. And so I think that's the big reason we're missing people in their coverage, because they work for a small business, they're self-employed, and so the only way to make it a single-payer government-run system is to bring everybody up to that level. And also I agree with Dan with negotiating the drug prices. You know, I know firsthand how much it costs to get drugs to the market and through the FDA approval, and we shouldn't have to pay twice for our medication.
So for this panel, and then we'll start with Ms. Friedman. The retirement of the baby boom generation will place large burdens on the federal government, particularly regarding the financing of Social Security and Medicare. The budget deficit is expected to top $1 trillion in 2020, which will further strain future government finances. What specific steps would you recommend to ensure the long-term viability of Social Security?
I fundamentally believe that both our tax laws and our federal budget are statements of priorities, and for too long we have gotten those priorities wrong, right? The government's responsibility, I believe, is to provide opportunity and security to its people, and that it can't do that well unless it's operating with integrity. And on all three measures right now, our government is failing. We spend about $650 to $670 billion a year through the federal tax code on incentives and exclusions meant to incentivize growth and invest in growth to get a return in our country, and we're investing in the wrong things. If we instead looked at investments for first-time home ownership, saving to go to school, starting your own business, and entrepreneurship, we could get a lot further. And this budget that has been created by congressional Republicans sets up the gap that we are now scrambling to fill. We need to set our priorities better, and we can then fully fund Medicare and Social Security and honor the commitments that we've made to the baby boomer generation, but also the next generations.
This is something that's very near and dear to my heart. My mom's in her 70s, and she's a teacher. Her retirement plan, unfortunately, has been to work harder and to work longer. We have to ensure that we protect Social Security. The fact that the Republicans pushed through this tax bill, what they didn't say, in order to pay for it, they're making important cuts to programs like Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and even food stamps. That's how they're paying for this. They have put large corporations in the center of our policy making rather than our families. We have to prioritize Social Security. People have to have that security when they retire, and we have to ensure that Medicare is also prioritized along with education and healthcare.
This amazing country that I've spent most of my adult life fighting for would just have some core values. We are a place that takes... We were a place without good microphones. But we are a place that is judged by the way we take care of those in need, by the way we take care of seniors. And Republicans have just passed a tax bill that adds $1.5 trillion of debt, $1.5 trillion, and puts at risk Social Security. This is something that people across the country have paid into. It is not an entitlement. It is something that you deserve. It is something that you have paid into. And in Congress, I will fight to make sure that we get rid of the $1.5 trillion of debt that's mostly benefiting, 80% of it is benefiting foreign entities. And we go back to a system where we are making sure we take care of our seniors and we fully fund Social Security, and then every American has the right to spend the last years of their lives in dignity. That's worth fighting for. Thank you.
So for this panel, we'll start with Dr. Biggins. Notwithstanding the coming financial crunch, some Democrats have advocated boosting benefits for Social Security. If you support that idea, how would you pay for it? And I will note that President Obama advocated adjusting the cost of living formula, which would have had the effect of reducing benefits in the future.
So I agree with what's been said. You know, we are judged as a country by how we care for our aging population. And so I think that it is incumbent upon us to make sure that the Social Security is there for them, because as we've said, they've paid into it, they deserve it, and it's available for future generations.